I've never been one to lean toward paranoia, or at least I never used to be. Felicia and I had been together for 5 years, married for 3, and life was stable. Things felt comfortable, or so I thought. She worked in marketing, and I was doing decently as a financial consultant. We weren't rich, but we managed well enough. Occasional nice dinners, periodic vacations, and binge-watching shows on lazy Sundays. Nothing extraordinary, just ordinary life. Then, a few months back, things began to shift. At first, the changes were so minor I almost ignored them. Little things you brush off because, honestly, no one wants to seem overly suspicious. Felicia started staying late at work more often, explaining that her team couldn't get anything done without her. Fair enough. Work happens, right? But it wasn't her late hours that bothered me. It was how she acted when she got home. The Felicia I knew would usually collapse on the couch, venting about her day's frustrations. Now, she barely spoke to me. She'd give me a quick kiss, one that felt more like an obligation than affection, and rush off to her phone or the shower, almost as if she couldn't wait to escape. Her behavior with her phone also changed. Sure, everyone keeps their phone close these days, but Felicia suddenly started guarding hers like it held state secrets. Before, she'd leave it lying around without a second thought. Now it was always face down or tucked away in her bag. If it buzzed while I was nearby, she'd grab it before I could even glance at the screen. And the excuses? Don't get me started on those. Any time I asked what was going on, she'd get defensive, acting as though I was prying. One evening, I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us. It's been a while since we had time together, I said, trying to let her know I missed her. But before I could even finish, she shot it down. I can't, babe. There's an urgent meeting tonight, she said, tying her hair in that effortless way that used to drive me crazy. Gregory dragged things out again. You know how he is, she added with a laugh that sounded forced. Then she kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her purse, and was out the door before I could get another word in. As I stood there, watching her leave, I found myself wondering who Gregory even was. She'd mentioned him before, a co-worker, supposedly harmless, but something about how she said his name this time made my stomach twist. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions without proof, so I let it go. A few days later, Courtney, our neighbor from across the hall, knocked on my door. Courtney is one of those people who always seems to know everyone's business, even if no one asks. "Hey, Caleb, got a second?" she said, with her usual nosy grin. "Sure," I replied, leaning against the door frame, bracing myself for whatever gossip she was about to share. "I was out with some friends last night and, well, I think I saw Felicia," she said, her voice lowering into that conspiratorial tone she uses when spilling secrets. "She was at that new Italian place downtown." Lorella, I frowned. Felicia had told me she was working late. Courtney gave me a look that screamed skepticism. "Well?" "She wasn't alone. She was with some guy, tall, dark-haired, kind of good-looking. They seemed close. It wasn't much, just a little nudge, but it planted a seed of doubt that wouldn't go away. I tried to shrug it off, but it lingered all day. That night I paid close attention. When I asked her about work, she avoided eye contact. "Same old stuff," she muttered, scrolling through her phone as if I wasn't even there. I wanted to confront her, but what could I say? That Courtney thought she saw her with a guy? It wasn't enough. I needed real proof, and I got it sooner than I expected. One evening, Felicia left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to shower. Normally, I wouldn't even think of touching it, but this time, something snapped. Maybe it was the way she said Gregory's name. Maybe it was Courtney's comment. Or maybe I was just tired of being in the dark. My heart pounded as I picked up her phone, not even sure what I was looking for. Just something, anything, to explain why things felt so wrong. And then I saw it. A text from Gregory at the top of her notifications. "You looked amazing. Can't wait for Friday." It hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping there was some innocent explanation. But deep down, I already knew. I shouldn't have. but I opened her photo gallery. There, I found pictures of her and Gregory at a work event. They weren't just casual snapshots, they were close, arms around each other, smiling in a way that turned my stomach. She was wearing the red dress she knew I loved, the one she hadn't worn for me in months. The worst part? It was an event I hadn't even been invited to. She'd told me it was just for the team, not a big deal, nothing I'd enjoy, and yet there she was, clinging to Gregory like he was her whole world. I locked the phone and put it back on the counter just as I heard the water shut off upstairs. My mind raced, a storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I wanted to confront her then and there, but I held back. I needed time to process. When she came downstairs wrapped in a towel, she gave me a quick smile. "What do you want to do for dinner?" she asked casually. I looked at her, really looked at her. And all I could see was the woman in those photos, the woman who had lied to my face and betrayed me without hesitation. "Not hungry," I muttered, brushing past her into the living room. She didn't even ask what was wrong. In that moment, I knew the Felicia I had married, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. In her place was someone I no longer recognized. Someone who could look me in the eye and lie without a second thought. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I decided exactly what I was going to do about it. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this slide. The moment I saw those photos, it felt like everything inside me collapsed. My heart wasn't just broken, it was shattered, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to everything I thought was real. I stumbled into the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and sank onto the cold tile floor. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and my chest tightened so much it felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the ease with which she lied. She would come home from Gregory acting like everything was normal, as if she hadn't just destroyed our marriage for some meaningless fling with a guy she insisted was only a friend. I slammed my fist against the floor, the sharp pain grounding me momentarily. I stared blankly at the wall, my thoughts racing. The worst part wasn't even the photos. It was her. The way she had turned so cold. For months, every time I tried to bridge the growing gap between us, she just pulled further away. I felt the distance widening, but I convinced myself it was just a rough patch, that work stress was weighing her down and we'd work through it. Now, though, I knew the truth. She wasn't just slipping away. She was running headlong into Gregory's arms, and I'd been too blind to see it. I could hear her moving around outside the bathroom, probably getting ready for bed like it was just another night. The thought made my blood boil. How could she lie to my face, crawl into our bed, and sleep beside me as if nothing was wrong? My jaw clenched so hard it ached. She didn't know I had figured it out, not yet, and that was the only advantage I had. The next day, I reached out to my old friend Brian. We'd been friends since childhood, and he was one of the few people I trusted completely. I sent him a message asking if he was free for a drink, and less than an hour later, we were sitting in a dimly lit dive bar downtown. Brian studied me closely as I downed my shot. "What's going on, man?" he asked. I didn't hold back. I laid everything out. The late nights, the strange behavior with her phone, the photos, and the message from Gregory. As I spoke, the anger simmered just beneath the surface. Saying it all out loud made it feel more real, and I hated that. When I finished, Brian leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Damn, man, that's rough. I don't even know what to say." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, join the club." "You've got to leave her, Caleb," Brian said, his voice low. "She's not worth it. If she's doing this to you now, she'll do it again. Cut your losses, file for divorce, and get out." He was right. He should have been right. But it wasn't that simple. Walking away felt like losing, and after what she'd done, that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the same pain she'd caused me. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. "I'm not walking away from this. Not yet." Brian raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning?" "I'm gonna make her feel the same humiliation she put me through," I muttered, more to myself than to him. His expression grew wary. "What does that mean, Caleb?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Amber." Brian's eyes widened, and then he burst out laughing. "Amber? Are you serious? Felicia hates her." Exactly. Amber had always been a sore spot between Felicia and me. She'd been Felicia's best friend for years, but there was always this unspoken tension between Amber and me. It was nothing I ever acted on, but Felicia had picked up on it. Amber's playful, flirty nature drove Felicia crazy. We'd argued about Amber more times than I could count, even though nothing had ever happened. But now, something was going to happen, and it would push Felicia over the edge. "You know, Amber's always had a thing for you," Brian said, shaking his head with a grin. "This is gonna get messy." "That's the point," I replied, my tone dark. "She deserves messy." Brian gave me a skeptical look, but didn't argue. "Just be careful, man. Stuff like this never ends well." That night, I came home from the bar and lay in bed beside Felicia, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Part of me wanted to wake her up, shove the pictures in her face, and demand answers, but I knew there was nothing she could say to make it right. So, I started planning. Amber had always made her interest in me clear, not in an obvious way, but through little comments, lingering touches, and that sly smile she'd give me when Felicia wasn't looking. Felicia had noticed and hated it, but I'd always shut Amber down out of respect for my marriage. Now, I was done being the good guy. I opened Amber's contact on my phone and hesitated for a moment. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the type to use someone to get revenge. But Felicia had turned me into this person. If this was what it took to make her feel what I felt, so be it. I typed a message. "Hey, it's been a while. We should catch up sometime." I stared at the screen for a second, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. Amber responded within an hour. Of course she did. She always replied quickly when it came to me. "Hey, stranger, long time no see. I'd love to catch up. Coffee sometime?" I smirked at the screen. It was too easy. Amber had always been too eager, too interested. Felicia had sensed it, and now her worst fear was about to come true. We met at a cozy little coffee shop downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and overpriced lattes. I spotted Amber before she saw me. Her long blonde hair, tight jeans, and low-cut blouse left little to the imagination. "Caleb!" she called out, her face lighting up as I approached. She gave me a hug that lingered a second too long, her perfume, a mix of sweetness and musk, filling the air. "Amber," I said with a smile, "you look amazing." She laughed, brushing her hair back behind her ear. "Stop it! You haven't changed a bit." The conversation flowed easily. We reminisced about old memories and shared inside jokes. Amber leaned in close, touched my arm often, and flashed her signature flirtatious smile. I didn't stop her. In fact, I played along, complimenting her laugh, her smile, and the way she hadn't lost her spark. She soaked up every word. We stayed for over an hour, and by the time we left, I could feel the spark I'd ignited grow into a flame. Amber gave me one final hug before heading off, her lips brushing against my cheek as she whispered, "We should do this again soon." As I walked back to my car, I knew she was hooked. The game had officially begun. A few days later, I sent her a text. "How about dinner? My treat. I know a spot you'll love." She agreed without hesitation, and at that moment, I realized I had her exactly where I wanted her. Felicia's closest friend was practically begging for my attention, and I was more than willing to give it, for now. We met at an upscale restaurant, the kind of place with dim lighting and a wine list that seemed to go on forever. Amber arrived fashionably late. wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her every curve. "You clean up well," I said, standing to greet her. She grinned. "You don't look too bad yourself." Dinner felt like a slow, seductive dance. This time, Amber's flirtation wasn't playful. It was intentional. She leaned in close when she spoke, her hand occasionally brushing mine as she reached for her wine glass. I didn't pull away. Instead, I mirrored her moves, locking eyes and smiling at all the right moments. It was all about building tension, letting anticipation simmer. Midway through the meal, Amber leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a low, intimate tone. "You know, Caleb, I've always had a thing for you." I acted surprised. "Really? I had no idea." She rolled her eyes playfully. "Oh, come on. You must have known. I mean, Felicia never appreciated you the way she should have." "I always thought she took you for granted." I took a slow sip of wine, letting the words hang in the air before responding. "You might be right about that." Amber's smile widened as her hand slid over mine. "Caleb, you're amazing. Any woman would be lucky to have you." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "If only you'd told me that sooner." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a brief moment I saw the flicker of hope in them, the kind of hope that makes people act recklessly. Meanwhile, back at home, Felicia was starting to notice the shift. I could tell by the way she watched me, the way her questions became more frequent and probing. "You've seemed different lately," she said cautiously one night. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Why wouldn't it be?" She frowned slightly, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know, you just seem distant." I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired." It was a weak excuse, but it was enough to throw her off for now. I wasn't ready for a confrontation, not yet. I needed to keep things under wraps until my plan was fully in motion. The more I pulled away, the more suspicious Felicia became. I saw it in the way she studied me, in how her questions grew sharper. "Where were you tonight?" she asked one evening as I came home later than usual. "Out with Brian," I replied smoothly. "You know how he is. One beer turns into 5. She didn't seem convinced, but what could she say? She was the one sneaking around with Gregory. If she wanted to accuse me of anything, she'd have to face her own guilt first. I made sure to keep things vague enough to frustrate her without giving her anything concrete. It was a delicate balance, but I was getting good at it. My goal was simple: to make her feel the same confusion, paranoia, and constant doubt that I had endured. Every time she glanced at her phone or furrowed her brow at one of my vague answers, I felt a dark satisfaction. It wasn't enough to even the score, not yet, but it was a start. Amber, on the other hand, was completely invested. Dinner had gone exactly as planned, and by the end of the night, she made her intentions clear. She kissed me on the cheek as we said goodnight, her lips lingering just a moment too long. "Call me," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. I smiled. "Count on it." As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of triumph. Felicia had no idea what was coming, and Amber was falling deeper into the trap with every passing day. The stage was set. All I had to do was play my role and wait for the right moment to watch it all unravel. Our wedding anniversary arrived faster than I expected. It was supposed to be a celebration of love, wasn't it? 5 years together, 3 of them married, but instead I was orchestrating a grand performance of betrayal and humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Felicia had no clue what was coming. She'd made her choices with Gregory, and tonight she would see just how far off course those choices had taken her. I spared no expense booking a countryside villa, a sprawling estate with ivy-covered walls, sparkling chandeliers, and a garden straight out of a storybook. We invited everyone: friends, co-workers, neighbors, and of course, Gregory. His invitation was deliberate. The goal wasn't just to hurt Felicia, it was to make sure she had an audience. That morning, Felicia seemed genuinely excited, more animated than I'd seen her in months. It only fueled my anger. Her enthusiasm wasn't for me. It was for the spectacle she thought we were putting on. She floated around the house, humming as she got ready, blissfully unaware that my excitement was for entirely different reasons. By the time evening arrived, the villa was packed with guests. I played the role of the perfect husband, greeting everyone with a smile. Felicia looked stunning in her dress, the same red one she'd worn with Gregory. I couldn't decide if she wore it out of guilt or arrogance, but either way it strengthened my resolve. Throughout the night I stayed by her side, my hand resting on the small of her back, whispering sweet words into her ear. She basked in the compliments from our friends about how lucky we were and how strong our relationship appeared. I nodded along, swallowing the bitter truth I wanted to spill. Amber was there too, looking bold and dangerous in a sleek black dress. From across the room she smirked at me, and I gave her a subtle nod. Aha, she knew her role and exactly when to act. Gregory, on the other hand, arrived late, just as I had hoped. I was in the middle of a conversation with Felicia's co-workers when I saw her freeze, her eyes flickering toward the door. There he was, strolling in with that smug grin I recognized all too well from the photos. The transformation in Felicia was instant. She lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months, her whole body coming alive. It was like watching someone wake from a deep sleep. That was all the confirmation I needed. I'd wondered if I had been overreacting, but the way she looked at him left no doubt. I clenched my jaw but forced myself to stay calm. No outbursts. No confrontation. Not yet. There was a script, and I was determined to follow it. I made a point to warmly welcome Gregory, clapping him on the shoulder and handing him a drink. Felicia's smile grew tight and uneasy as she watched us. She had no idea how much I already knew. As the night wore on and the crowd thinned, I slipped away from the party. Felicia noticed, of course. I could feel her eyes on me as I excused myself and disappeared upstairs. That was her cue. Soon she'd come looking for me, but by then it would be too late. Amber was already waiting in the room, leaning casually against the bed frame with that familiar, mischievous grin. "You sure about this?" she asked, though we both knew she wasn't going to stop me. "More than sure," I muttered, closing the door behind me. It didn't take much more convincing before we were tangled in the sheets, her hands roaming freely while her breath warmed my neck. It was wild, chaotic, nothing like anything I'd ever experienced with Felicia. But it wasn't about the intimacy. It was about the plan, the reckoning that was now unfolding. Right on cue, the door flew open, and there Felicia stood, frozen in place. Her expression shifted rapidly, from confusion to disbelief, to utter devastation. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Amber, completely unbothered, sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around her like a trophy of her victory. "Well," Amber said with a smug grin, "looks like you finally know how it feels to be betrayed." I turned my eyes to Felicia, waiting for her to explode, but she didn't scream or cry. She just stood there, pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorknob. I could see it in her eyes, the realization dawning that not only had I caught her in her own deceit, but I had gone further, humiliating her in front of the one person she despised most. "You," she finally whispered, her voice shaking, "you bastard!" I sat up calmly, offering her the same smirk she'd given me so many times before when she thought I was clueless. "Now we're even," I said. She stared at me, her chest heaving with fury and betrayal. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the one where she would finally understand what it felt like to have her world collapse. Downstairs, the party carried on, oblivious to the chaos above. Though I knew that wouldn't last long, Felicia would flee to the crowd soon, and once she did, the whispers would spread. The humiliation would settle in, just as it had for me when I first saw those pictures. Felicia backed away from the doorway, her gaze locked on mine. "You're disgusting, she spat, venom dripping from her words. I shrugged, entirely unfazed. Takes one to know one. And just like that, she was gone, slamming the door behind her. Ember chuckled lightly beside me, lighting a cigarette as though nothing unusual had happened. "Well, that was fun," she said, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. I didn't respond, instead lying back on the bed and staring upward, listening to the distant sounds of music and laughter from below. The plan had unfolded perfectly. I had my revenge. Yet, as I lay there, the triumph felt hollow. The satisfaction I had anticipated didn't come. Instead, there was a void where my anger had been. I had won the game, but at what cost? I'd gained nothing, absolutely nothing. Felicia had stood frozen in the doorway, her wide eyes and slightly parted lips showing her struggle to even process what she was seeing. Her disbelief, betrayal, and dawning realization were etched across her face as she pieced together the nightmare before her. Amber, still composed, slid off the bed with deliberate slowness, clearly savoring every second of Felicia's agony. She wrapped herself in a silk robe like she had just won a competition. "Well," Amber said, her tone sharp and dripping with malice, "now you know what it's like to lose trust." Felicia's face crumpled briefly and I thought she might collapse right there, but instead she turned her fury toward Amber, glaring with such raw hatred that it was almost tangible. "You're disgusting," she hissed, her voice breaking. Amber laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that echoed through the room. "Don't act so surprised, Felicia. We both know you had this coming." Per moment, Felicia's knuckles turned even whiter as she gripped the doorframe, and I thought she might lunge at Amber. But instead she spun around and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. The sound reverberated through the house, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers downstairs began. Amber, still perched on the edge of the bed, lit another cigarette with a self-satisfied grin. "Well, that went better than I expected," she said. I stayed silent, lying back against the pillows, my mind unusually blank. The satisfaction I had envisioned wasn't there. I had imagined this moment for weeks, the ultimate revenge, the perfect act of payback. But instead, all I felt was emptiness. The fallout started almost immediately. From downstairs, I could hear the murmur of voices rising. Quiet conversations turned into full-blown whispers. The first ripple had spread. Someone must have seen Felicia, rushing from the room, her face pale and wild-eyed. In a crowd like this, secrets didn't last long. Amber leaned over, smirking. "You know it's only a matter of time before everyone knows the full story, right?" I nodded. That had always been the plan. Felicia wouldn't just lose me, she'd lose everything. Her friends, her dignity, her carefully crafted social reputation. By the time we made our way back downstairs, the whispers had grown louder, the tension palpable. Guests glanced our way, some curious, others amused. It didn't take long for the truth to spread like wildfire. Felicia's affair with Gregory, my revenge with Ember, it was all out in the open now, and there was no undoing it. Amber, ever the drama queen, wasted no time making her next move. As soon as Felicia reappeared, disheveled and red-eyed, Amber stepped forward, her expression sweet, but her tone dripping with venom. "Felicia," she said, her voice saccharine, "I think it's time we cleared the air, don't you?" Felicia's glare could have cut glass. "You're not doing this here," she said, her jaw clenched tight. "Oh, but I think I am," Amber replied, her smile widening. "You betrayed me. You betrayed Caleb. Hell, you betrayed yourself. And everyone here deserves to know exactly the kind of person you really are." The room went silent. Felicia looked like she wanted to vanish into thin air, but Amber wasn't about to let her. Her words were sharp and unrelenting. "Let's face it, Felicia, you threw away your marriage for some loser who doesn't even have the decency to show up on time." Amber tilted her head mockingly. What was your plan, to keep sneaking around with Gregory until Caleb figured it out? Or did you actually think you'd get away with it forever? Felicia's eyes darted around the room, desperate for someone, anyone, to defend her. But the faces staring back were cold and judgmental. There wasn't a single ally in sight. She was completely isolated now. Amber turned to the gathered crowd, addressing them as though delivering the final blow. I've had enough of being friends with a backstabbing. So, Felicia, consider our friendship over. Felicia's face crumbled, and she opened her mouth to reply, but no sound came out. Amber didn't wait for a response. Instead, she smirked one last time and walked away, leaving Felicia stranded in the center of the room, humiliated and exposed. And just like that, the social circle Felicia had spent years cultivating began to fall apart. It was like watching a house of cards collapse one piece at a time. People whispered behind her back, their smiles strained and insincere. Friends she thought she could rely on began to pull away, not wanting to get caught in the fallout. Gregory, unsurprisingly, disappeared the moment things got messy. I knew he'd abandon her, and he didn't let me down. By the time her world began to crumble, he was already retreating, trying to protect his own image. The rumors soon spread to her workplace. Felicia, who had once been a rising star, admired by everyone, was now simply the woman who had wrecked her marriage for an office fling. The whispers followed her into meetings, lingering in every conversation she had. The professional reputation she had worked so hard to build was now irreparably damaged. At first, Felicia tried to fight back, offering explanations, justifications, but no one cared to hear her sigh. Gregory stayed out of it, refusing to come to her defense. Without his support, Felicia had nothing left to stand on. She was left to face the consequences alone. I watched it all unfold with an odd sense of detachment. For a while, seeing her life unravel felt satisfying. Knowing she was losing everything and getting exactly what she deserved brought a twisted sense of justice. But as time passed, the satisfaction began to fade. The anger that had fueled me, the rage that had driven every action, started to dissipate. All it left behind was a hollow ache. Sure, I'd won the game, but the cost felt greater than the victory. Felicia was a wreck. Isolated, disgraced, and abandoned by everyone she once thought had her back. And I wasn't any better. Yes, I had destroyed her, but in doing so, I had lost myself. In the immediate aftermath, watching her life collapse brought a grim sense of triumph. It felt like I had achieved justice, the kind I had imagined so many times. I saw her stumble through the ruins of her life like a shadow of her former self. No more late-night work meetings, no more sneaky texts. Her friends, our friends, avoided her like she carried a contagious disease. At work, the respect she once commanded had evaporated, replaced by whispers and disapproving glances. And Gregory? He disappeared entirely, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. I had done it. I had burned everything to the ground, just as I had planned. For the first few days, I felt victorious. Every time I saw her shuffling around the house, her eyes empty, her spirit crushed, I told myself she deserved it. When I heard her crying softly in the bathroom late at night, I reminded myself of those pictures, of Gregory's texts, of every lie she'd told me with a smile on her face. I didn't comfort her, I didn't feel pity, I felt justified. But as days passed, that sense of victory began to dull. It was replaced by something else, something harder to define, a nagging emptiness that gnawed at me. I found myself sitting alone in the quiet house, thinking about how things used to be, back when I thought we were happy. Memories played in my mind like a movie. Lazy mornings spent in bed, her laughter filling the room. Those first dates when everything felt fresh and exciting. I remembered how she used to look at me, like I was the only person in the world. No matter how much I tried to push those memories away, they kept resurfacing, uninvited and unwanted. One night, Brian called. Throughout this mess, he had been my biggest supporter, always reminding me that Felicia got what she deserved. "Come out to the bar," he said. "One last night to celebrate. You've earned it, man." I went, hoping the noise and drinks would drown out the emptiness creeping in. The bar was loud, packed with people laughing and yelling over the music. Brian slapped me on the back, ordering shots like we were celebrating a promotion instead of the end of my marriage. "To freedom," he shouted, raising his glass. "To being done with that cheating..." I forced a smile, clinking my glass with his and throwing back the shot. The alcohol burned going down, but it didn't bring the relief I was hoping for. The victory felt hollow, and the celebration seemed meaningless. Brian kept talking, but his words blurred together in the background. I sat there, nursing my drink, feeling more out of place than ever. At some point, Brian leaned in, grinning. "What's wrong, man? You should be on top of the world right now." I shrugged, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "I don't know, Brian. It doesn't feel the way I thought it would." Brian gave me a confused look. "You won, Caleb. You got your revenge. You're free now." The word free felt strange in my mind. Sure, Felicia was out of my life, her betrayal exposed, her reputation in ruins. But instead of feeling free, I felt lost. Somewhere in all the anger and plotting, I hadn't just lost her, I'd lost myself. After another drink, I excused myself and left the bar, leaving Brian behind. I drove home through the dark streets in silence, feeling like a stranger in my own life. When I got inside, the house felt unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of our past. I scrolled through old photos, vacations, birthdays, candid shots from nights in. One picture caught my eye, our first anniversary, sitting on a beach, smiling like fools. I remembered how happy I'd been that day, so certain she was the person I'd spend the rest of my life with. Back then, I believed in us, in love, in the future we were building together. Now, I wasn't sure I believed in any of it. I stared at the photos, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost, not just Felicia, but the person I used to be, the man who believed in love, the man who thought trust was unbreakable. That man was gone, replaced by someone bitter, empty, and exhausted. The silence of the house pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I took a long sip of my beer and leaned back on the couch, letting the memories wash over me. Revenge was supposed to bring peace. That was the lie I told myself. I thought if I could make her feel the way I did, betrayed, humiliated, it would fix everything. But the truth was, revenge hadn't healed anything. It had only replaced one kind of pain with another, deeper kind. Felicia was gone, her life in ruins, but instead of feeling victorious, I felt hollow. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in the flickering light of the muted TV. The beer in my hand grew warm, and the photos on my phone blurred as I scrolled aimlessly. It hit me then. There would be no closure, no neat ending, just a broken marriage, shattered trust, and the bitter truth that some wounds don't heal, they just linger like scars. I had won, but the victory was meaningless. Peace was out of reach, and the man I once was, the one who believed in love, was gone forever. All that remained was the empty house, the quiet hum of old memories, and me sitting alone amidst the ruins of a life I thought I understood. For the first time since this nightmare began, I grasped the true cost of revenge. I hadn't just lost Felicia, I'd lost myself.